The cemetery was silent, except for the faint rustling of leaves in the distance. Emilia had come to visit her sister's grave, as she did every week. But this time, something was different. As she approached the tombstone, her heart skipped a beat. There, lying on the cold ground, was a tiny bundle wrapped in a thin blanket. Her steps quickened, and her breath caught in her throat. She knelt down, her hands trembling as she reached for the bundle. A newborn baby, no more than a few days old, lay there, his face pale and his lips slightly blue. Emilia's mind raced. Who would do such a thing? How long had he been here? She glanced around, but the cemetery was empty. The only sound was the baby's weak whimper, barely audible. Without thinking, Emilia scooped the baby into her arms, wrapping him tightly in her coat. His tiny body felt cold against her chest, and she could feel his fragile heartbeat. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "It's okay, little one. I've got you now." But as she held him closer, a chilling thought crossed her mind. This was her sister's grave. The baby had been left here for a reason, and that reason was tied to a secret her sister had taken to her grave. A secret Emilia was about to uncover. Emilia rushed home with the baby, her mind a whirlwind of questions and emotions. She laid him gently on her couch, wrapping him in warm blankets and feeding him a little milk. The baby's cries softened, and he finally drifted into a restless sleep. Emilia sat beside him, staring at his tiny face. He looked so much like her sister, Sarah. The resemblance was uncanny. The same button nose, the same soft curls of hair. Her thoughts raced back to Sarah's final days. Sarah had been withdrawn, secretive, and often tearful. She had refused to talk about what was troubling her, and Emilia had assumed it was grief over their parents' recent passing. But now, as she looked at the baby, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Sarah had been hiding something, something big. Emilia's hands trembled as she reached for her sister's old diary, which she had found among Sarah's belongings after her death. She had never opened it, respecting her sister's privacy. But now she had no choice. Flipping through the pages, her eyes landed on an entry dated just a few months before Sarah's passing. "I don't know what to do. He's powerful, wealthy, and cruel. He'll never let me keep the baby. I can't let him take my child away from me. I have to protect my baby no matter what." Emilia's heart sank. Sarah had been pregnant, and someone had forced her to keep it a secret. But who? The diary didn't mention a name, only vague references to a man who had manipulated and threatened her. Emilia's fists clenched as anger surged through her. Whoever this man was, he had driven her sister to despair, and now he had abandoned her child on her grave. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. Emilia gently picked him up, holding him close. "I'll protect you, Oliver," she whispered, naming him after their late father. "No one will hurt you, not while I'm here." But Emilia knew this was only the beginning. The man Sarah had feared was still out there, and he would stop at nothing to keep his secrets buried. Emilia would have to fight, not just for Oliver, but for the justice her sister had been denied. Days turned into weeks, and Emilia devoted herself to caring for Oliver. She took him to the doctor, who confirmed he was healthy but malnourished from his days on the grave. Emilia's heart ached at the thought of what he had endured, but she was determined to give him the love and safety he deserved. However, her peaceful days were short-lived. One evening, as she was feeding Oliver, a loud knock echoed through her small apartment. She froze, her instincts screaming that this was no ordinary visitor. Carefully placing Oliver in his crib, she approached the door and peered through the peephole. A tall, well-dressed man stood outside, his expression cold and unyielding. Behind him stood two burly men who looked like bodyguards. Emilia's stomach churned. She didn't need an introduction to know who he was. This was the man Sarah had written about in her diary. She opened the door just a crack, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Can I help you?" The man's lips curled into a smirk. "I'm David Hartman. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Emilia's grip tightened on the door. "I don't know what you're talking about." David's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me. The child. Hand him over, and we can avoid any unpleasantness." Emilia's blood boiled. "You abandoned him on his mother's grave. You don't deserve to even look at him." David's smirk faded, replaced by a look of icy rage. Sarah was unstable. She couldn't take care of a child. I did what was best for him. You did what was best for you, Emilia shot back. You didn't want anyone to know about him. You didn't want your perfect life ruined by a scandal. David took a step closer, his voice low and threatening. Listen carefully. That child is my son, and I will not let some nobody stand in my way. If you don't hand him over, I'll make sure you regret it. Amelia slammed the door shut, her heart pounding. She leaned against it, trying to steady her breathing. She knew David wasn't bluffing. He had the power, the money, and the connections to destroy her life. But she also knew she couldn't back down. Oliver was all she had left of Sarah, and she would fight to the bitter end to protect him. As she picked up Oliver and held him close, she whispered, I won't let him take you, I promise. But deep down, she knew the battle had only just begun. Emilia knew she couldn't face David alone. She needed help, someone who could stand up to his wealth and influence. The next morning, she reached out to a lawyer named Marcus, a childhood friend who had always been fiercely loyal to her family. Marcus was known for taking on tough cases, especially those involving injustice. When Emilia explained the situation, his voice hardened with determination. We'll fight this, Emilia. No one gets to abandon a child and then swoop in when it's convenient. But you need to be prepared. David Hartman isn't just wealthy, he's ruthless. He'll use every trick in the book to get what he wants. Emilia nodded even though Marcus couldn't see her. I don't care what it takes. Oliver deserves a chance at a good life, and I won't let David take that away from him. Over the next few weeks, Emilia and Marcus worked tirelessly to build their case. They gathered evidence, including Sarah's diary, medical records, and witness statements from neighbors who had seen Sarah during her pregnancy. They also discovered that David had a history of manipulating and intimidating those who crossed him. But proving his cruelty in court would be no easy task. Meanwhile, David's threats grew more frequent. Emilia received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, warning her to back off. Her apartment was vandalized, and she found herself constantly looking over her shoulder. But every time fear threatened to overwhelm her, she would look at Oliver, sleeping peacefully in his crib, and her resolve would strengthen. One evening, as Emilia was preparing dinner, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was a woman, a social worker sent by David. The woman's tone was polite but firm. Mr. Hartman has filed for custody of the child. As part of the investigation, I need to assess your home and your ability to care for him. Emilia's heart sank, but she forced a smile. Of course. Come in. The social worker inspected every corner of the apartment, asking pointed questions about Emilia's income, her work schedule, and her plans for Oliver's future. Emilia answered honestly, but she could tell the woman was skeptical. You're a single woman with limited resources, the social worker said finally. Mr. Hartman, on the other hand, can provide the child with a life of luxury. The court will take that into consideration. Emilia's hands clenched into fists, but she kept her voice calm. Oliver doesn't need luxury. He needs love, and I can give him that. The social worker gave her a pitying look. We'll see what the court decides. After she left, Emilia sat down, feeling the weight of the battle pressing down on her. But she refused to give up. She would fight for Oliver no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and Emilia walked into the courtroom with Oliver in her arms. She could feel the weight of David's gaze on her as she took her seat. He sat on the opposite side of the room, flanked by his expensive lawyers, his expression smug and confident. Emilia clenched her jaw, refusing to let his arrogance intimidate her. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, called the court to order. This is a custody hearing for the minor child, Oliver Hartman. Both parties will present their cases, and the court will decide what is in the best interest of the child. David's lawyers went first, painting a picture of a wealthy, stable man who could provide Oliver with everything he could ever need. They presented documents showing David's financial status, his luxurious home, and his connections to elite schools. They even brought in character witnesses who testified to his generosity and integrity. Emilia's heart sank as she listened. How could she compete with that? But then it was Marcus's turn to speak. He stood tall, his voice steady and commanding. Your Honor, this case is not about wealth or status. It's about love, responsibility, and justice. My client, Emilia, has been the only constant in Oliver's life since he was abandoned on his mother's grave. She has cared for him, nurtured him, and fought for him when no one else would. Meanwhile, David Hartman has shown nothing but cruelty and neglect. Marcus presented Sarah's diary, highlighting the entries that detailed David's threats and manipulation. He called witnesses who testified to Sarah's fear of David and her determination to protect her child. He also presented evidence of the harassment Emilia had endured since taking Oliver in. David's lawyers objected repeatedly, trying to discredit the evidence, but Marcus stood his ground. Your Honor, David Hartman abandoned his child in the most callous way imaginable. He does not deserve to be rewarded for his cruelty. Oliver belongs with the person who has shown him nothing but love and dedication, Emilia. The courtroom fell silent as the judge considered the arguments. Emilia held Oliver tightly, her heart pounding. She could feel David's glare burning into her, but she refused to look at him. Finally, the judge spoke. This is a difficult case, but my primary concern is the welfare of the child. I will take all the evidence into consideration and deliver my ruling tomorrow. As Emilia left the courtroom, she felt a mix of hope and fear. The battle wasn't over yet, but she had fought with everything she had. Now all she could do was wait. The next day, the courtroom was packed. Emilia sat nervously, holding Oliver close. David was there too, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room was palpable as the judge entered and took her seat. In the matter of custody for Oliver Hartman, the judge began, her voice firm and clear, this court has carefully considered all the evidence presented. While Mr. Hartman has demonstrated the ability to provide financial stability, the court must also consider the emotional and moral aspects of this case. Emilia's heart raced as the judge continued. The abandonment of a child is a grave act, one that cannot be overlooked. The evidence shows that Mr. Hartman not only failed to take responsibility for his son, but also subjected the child's mother to significant emotional distress. This behavior raises serious concerns about his fitness as a parent. David's face darkened, but he remained silent. The judge turned her gaze to Emilia. On the other hand, Emilia has shown unwavering dedication to Oliver. She has provided him with love, care, and stability during a critical time in his life. Her actions demonstrate a deep commitment to his well-being. Emilia held her breath, her grip tightening on Oliver. The judge paused for a moment before delivering her final decision. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that custody of Oliver Hartman be granted to Emilia. Mr. Hartman will have no legal rights to the child unless otherwise determined by future proceedings. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but Emilia barely heard them. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged Oliver tightly. She had won. Oliver was safe. David stood abruptly, his face twisted with anger. This isn't over, he hissed, glaring at Emilia before storming out of the courtroom. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on Emilia's shoulder. You did it. Oliver's future is secure. But Emilia knew David wouldn't give up so easily. She would have to remain vigilant, but for now she allowed herself a moment of relief. Oliver was hers, and she would do everything in her power to give him the life he deserved. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm for Emilia and Oliver. The court's decision had given them a sense of security, but Emilia never let her guard down. She knew David was still out there, and she couldn't afford to underestimate him. Still, she focused on building a happy life for Oliver, one filled with love and laughter. Oliver grew into a cheerful, curious toddler, his bright eyes and infectious smile reminding Emilia so much of Sarah. Every night she would tell him stories about his mother, how kind she was, how brave, and how much she had loved him. Emilia wanted Oliver to know that, even though Sarah was gone, her love for him would always be a part of him. One sunny afternoon, Emilia took Oliver to the park. As she watched him play with other children, her heart swelled with pride. He was thriving, and it was all she had ever wanted for him. But as she sat on a bench, lost in thought, a familiar voice interrupted her reverie. He looks happy. Emilia froze. It was David. He stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Emilia instinctively moved closer to Oliver, her protective instincts kicking in. What do you want, David? She asked, her voice steady but cold. David sighed, his usual arrogance replaced by something softer, something almost like regret. "I'm not here to fight, Amelia. I just wanted to see him." Emilia's eyes narrowed. "You lost that right when you left him on a grave." David flinched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he looked at Oliver, who was now giggling as he chased a butterfly. "I made a lot of mistakes," he said quietly. "I was selfish, cruel, and blind to what really mattered. But seeing him now, I realize how much I've lost." Emilia's anger wavered, but she remained cautious. "It's too late for apologies, David. Oliver is my son now, and I won't let you hurt him." David nodded, his gaze still fixed on Oliver. "I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I hope one day he'll know that I regret what I did, that I wish I could have been better." Emilia didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. David lingered for a moment longer before turning to leave. As he walked away, Emilia felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, pity, and even a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, David had finally realized the gravity of his actions. But for now, her focus was on Oliver. She scooped him up into her arms, laughing as he squealed with delight. "Ready to go home, little one?" she asked, kissing his cheek. Oliver nodded, his tiny arms wrapping around her neck. "Home," he repeated, his voice filled with joy. As they walked home together, Emilia felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead might still have challenges, but she knew they would face them together. Oliver was her family, her heart, and her greatest joy. And no matter what, she would always fight for him. The story of Emilia and Oliver was one of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family. It was a reminder that, even in the face of cruelty and betrayal, the power of love could overcome anything. And for Emilia, that was enough.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.